Hi everyone, my name is Matt Colyer and I'm a product manager here at GitHub, and I work on the GitHub Enterprise product, which we'll be talking about today. In this talk, I'm going to cover the basics about the product, what it is, what it can do, and how to configure it, and a couple tips on how you can get the most out of your GitHub Enterprise install. I'm going to leave a few minutes at the end of the session for questions. But I'll also be available afterwards to answer any questions that we're not able to get to in the talk today. So first off, some people don't know that we offer an enterprise product. So let's do a quick show of hands. How many people here today are familiar with GitHub Enterprise? OK, so I'd say majority, but there's still a few people who aren't familiar. And for those who aren't, GitHub Enterprise is an on-premise product, which allows you to run GitHub behind your firewall with all the same services and technology that GitHub.com offers. And we provide it as a single virtual machine so that you can operate it within your own infrastructure. So some people ask, like, why is GitHub Enterprise important? And we really built GitHub Enterprise for the customer who can't put their code on the cloud. And that takes a lot of different forms. Some companies have government regulations, other companies have company policies that don't allow for their companies to put their code online. But for customers who can put it online, we actually really recommend GitHub.com. That's the best experience. But today, we're going to be talking about GitHub Enterprise for the companies that aren't able to put their code in the cloud. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the last year, because it's been a big change for GitHub Enterprise. For our older customers, I'm sure you'll remember the versions before this. But as Chris mentioned earlier today, we had a really big ship last November, and that was the 2.0 release. And it was a complete rewrite of the product and a relaunch of kind of the platform. And so we changed the version number to 2.0 to kind of indicate that to everyone. It brought a lot of great changes, and it provides a really solid foundation to build upon. Since that time, we've released a release every quarter. As you can see here, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, with all the specific features under each one of them. And one of the big themes of the last year was that we want to enable customers to run where they want to run. So initially, when we launched, you could only run it in VMware, AWS, and that was it. Over time, we've added in other platforms such as OpenStack, KVM, Zen, Hyper-V, and Azure. The other big theme that was kind of apparent from these different features is that we really want to invest in the enterprise admin experience. I assume some of you here today are those enterprise admins, and you're an important user group to us. Like, developers are an important group, but administrators are as well. And so we want to enable you to do your job better. And so some of the features listed here are also about making administrators' lives better. And kind of the final piece that I kind of want to highlight is that we're really a customer-driven company. We really do value your feedback in the different channels that we get it from. I work very closely with the support team. I also work very closely with our sales team. And I hear your stories on the field day in and day out. And so some of these features might be a result of conversations you've had over the past year. So it's an important feedback loop that we want you to know that we really take your feedback very seriously. So kind of getting further into how does this actually apply to you? So for people who haven't run it before, these are the platforms that we support. And the first big decision that you need to make in order to run GitHub Enterprise is to pick one of these platforms. And so often companies already have one of these infrastructures set up, and so they pick the one that they're most familiar with. And then I want to walk through the initial configuration of GitHub Enterprise and walk you through the different settings we have and the different capabilities that offers you to plug in with your existing infrastructure. And one of the things I want to highlight is that we really strive for simplicity. And so as part of that, we offer a lot of these administrative tools through the web UI, which you'll see here. And it's from the get-go. As soon as you start up your machine, you'll see this page, and you can get started fairly easily. So people who don't even have a lot of administrator experience can get started fairly easily. And then the other big thing is that we try to set defaults. So if you actually launch an enterprise install and you click Save and set up, it will actually just work out of box. Of course, it won't do exactly what you want, but we really want to make you successful from the get-go. So with that, let's actually get into some of the pages here. So this is the very first page that you'll see on your install when you come in. It has the license file, which you'll get. You can either get a trial license from our website, or you can get it directly from the sales team, and that indicates how many users that instance can run. And then you set an administrator password. And so this is a single password for all the administrators in your organization, and this is at the infrastructure level. So it's like people who have control over the OS and the file system. One of the recommendations that we make is that we really strongly encourage companies to use password managers and best password practices around this, because this is really the keys to the kingdom on your install. So you want to make sure that the people who have access to the system are really trusted, and it's only those set of people that have access. The first area of configuration for GitHub Enterprise is SSH. And it allows you to enter your SSH keys, which is important because it allows you access directly to the command line. And so in the past, you weren't able to fully access all areas of the virtual machine, but in 2.0, we allow now root access. And so it's really useful for more advanced kind of configuration and to really see what's going on with your install. And while you can introduce changes through the root access, we really recommend that people don't modify any of the setup there, because as you upgrade over time, those changes are going to be blown away. Because the update always overwrites everything to make sure that you're in a known good state on every upgrade. The next kind of area of configuration is the host name. So this is pretty clear for most people. It's the name that you're going to give your enterprise install. Another really important feature here that I'm not sure that everybody's aware of, and this is kind of a more advanced feature, is the subdomain option. And this is something that we introduced in the 2.0 release as well. And it actually turns out to be fairly important because subdomain isolation allows you to increase the security of your install. Without this option turned on, your users can create content under the same domain that the application runs in, which opens up additional security vectors that you might not want to open up. So we really do recommend that all of our customers run with this enabled, but that the setup is more complicated. So the couple caveats there is that you're going to need an SSL certificate that supports wildcards, because there's about 10 to 15 different subdomains that you're going to run over SSL. The other thing that you're going to need is DNS records set up to each of these subdomains so that your users can get access to it. So while there is a lot of extra work to kind of turn on that subdomain isolation, it really is important, and we encourage you to turn that on. So yeah, just to highlight, if you take one thing away from that slide, I want everybody to remember you should really turn on subdomain isolation. The next thing that we've kind of found over time is that from a customer perspective, is that making a clear name as to what GitHub is super helpful. So we found that when people use GitHub in the internal URL, it's much more clear to the users what's going on. So I know not everyone here has total flexibility over what they name things. And that some companies have very specific conventions, like maybe they are forced to use git01 at internalcorp.com, but it's oftentimes confusing to people as to what is actually on there. So that's another kind of piece of advice that we have. The next kind of configuration area is the network time configuration. And most people will just want to leave this alone. It usually works out of the box. The only reason you'd want to switch this is that if you have a specific time infrastructure set up. And if you do, you probably know what to put in there. The next section that we have is authentication, which is actually probably one of the most important configuration options for our customers. So we offer a variety of different adapters. We offer built-in authentication, which is the default. The good thing about built-in authentication is that it just works out of the box. So users log in, and on the first login, they create an account, and they set a password, and all of that is stored directly in the appliance. It's easy to set up, and then other good thing about it is that it's totally independent from the rest of your systems. A lot of our customers don't actually run this way, but it's kind of the default to get started. The downside is that, like I said, it's totally separate from all of your systems, and a lot of our customers want to be able to integrate single sign-on, or they already have an LDAP directory. So those are the other options that we offer. So LDAP is the next one that I'll go over. This allows you to use an Active Directory to authenticate all of your users. You can specify certain groups of users that are permitted. So maybe you mark all of your developers in a certain LDAP group. You can permit just that group to sign in. And on the first sign in, it will create the account for them, but it will use the password that you've got set up in your LDAP directory server. Another great feature that we introduced in the 2.1 series is that it allows you to sync permissions over for teams. So if you already do a lot of role-based management in your LDAP directory, you can say like, this team, like this, your web team is marked by a certain LDAP group. You can actually sync that over into your enterprise install so that you don't have to maintain both permission groups. You can do all of your user administration just in LDAP. Other couple of features that we have is you're able to sync SSH keys. So SSH keys are kind of difficult for developers to set up sometimes. And so if you already have those in your LDAP directory, you can copy those over so that your users don't have to. And you can keep them in sync if you have SSH key rotation policies, anything like that. The final thing that we can sync over is like emails so that we have a consistent email address in our system that matches the one that's in your system. And if you have like user renames or reorgs going on, we also provide API endpoints that allow you to change the mapping of users over time because we know that comes up. So we have an extensive developer documentation, and it's all kind of detailed there as to how to manage that. The next option is SAML. And so SAML is good because it offers a couple things that LDAP doesn't offer. If you have multiple LDAP directory servers, we don't support that with LDAP directly. The best way to kind of federate across multiple LDAP servers is through SAML. The other thing that SAML really provides you is that the ability to do single sign-on. So for users, it's a better user experience. Let's say I go to my corporate email and I sign into SAML, and now I have a cookie set on my machine so that it knows that I'm logged in. If you go to your GitHub install, GitHub knows that you've already signed in, if it conforms to your SAML policies. So say in the last half an hour you signed in, that cookie will still work on your GitHub install. So we find that a lot of customers actually kind of prefer this SAML option. It also allows a lot of flexibility if you want to put 2FA. If you want to manage 2FA, you can do that through your SAML integration as well. The other thing that we found useful for is, like I said, with those multiple LDAP servers, if you're acquiring companies, a lot of times companies come in with their own directory sets. And so an easy way to kind of integrate an acquisition into your company is to use SAML to bridge those two LDAP directories and provide like a single interface into your GitHub install. Our last authentication option is CAS, which stands for Centralized Authentication Service. It's a little less well-known than SAML, but the idea is very similar. It provides a single sign-on interface to your users. I think most customers who use this option already have CAS set up, and so that's why they continue to use it to standardize their infrastructure. The next option is privacy and security. So this is, again, a pretty important section. Almost all of our customers are going to want to configure this. The very top thing there is the SSL certificate, which is incredibly important. So we ship with a self-signed certificate on the appliance, which is great to get started so that your initial administration session is encrypted. But you really need to replace that with an actual SSL certificate that you own and trust in order to provide that security to your users. The other thing that I'll mention here is private mode. So this is kind of a big choice. So some of our customers turn it on and some of them turn it off. Most of our customers run behind a firewall, so they already limit network access. And so outside contributors can't access this network. So if you disable private mode, any repository that's public will be viewable inside of your VPN. Other customers they want even more control over that access, and so they enable private mode. And so private mode actually disables any kind of access without an account. But that means that each person who looks at a GitHub page is going to have a validated licensed account. So that includes just pages and public repositories. The third option that we see people use this for is some people host their GitHub Enterprise install on the public internet. And so if you do run it on the public internet, it is a bigger attack surface, and we require private mode to be turned on because you should really only have your users looking at your install. You don't want the general internet traffic looking at it. A final option here at the bottom, some of you might be excited about this. This is a recent addition in 2.3, is HTTP outbound proxy support. So like I said, a lot of customers run their enterprise installs inside of a VPN. And oftentimes, people want to track the outbound connections out of that VPN to the public internet. And filling in this HTTP proxy server allows you to do that. Or the other case that we see is that sometimes people will run a VPN internally, and then they'll host their build services in a different area. And in order to cross that bridge, they need that HTTP proxy. So like I said, pro tip, you really need a wildcard SSL certificate in order to support subdomain isolation. So that's like the most important thing to take away from like that last section. The pages configuration section is very simple. It's a choice of whether you want to enable pages for your customers or not. We strongly recommend that you leave this option enabled. It's enabled by default. The reason that we recommend that is that pages allow people to create some pretty amazing things. The thing that Chris mentioned earlier in his keynote talk, where somebody had actually created StarCraft in a browser and put it on Pages, uses the Pages product. Pages, if you're not familiar, is a way to take a repo and turn it into a public website. And all you do is do a git push, and it's available online. So it's a pretty powerful tool for people who don't do a lot of web development, that they can just get started fairly easily, use our GitHub desktop client, and push directly to the server, and then all of a sudden they have a website. And then they can collaborate with other users to keep that site up to date. So I've seen some pretty good uses of this for company intranets, allowing people to distribute information to other parts of the company, documentation. So if you look at developer.github.com, is actually run on a Pages site, as well as help.github.com. So we use this product extensively. And a couple examples that we really like to mention is react.github.io is Facebook's open source library, and they use it as well. And then Electron GitHub.io is also another Pages site. So it's a really awesome product. Some companies aren't able to enable it, but it's a pretty useful feature. The final, kind of most advanced part of the settings page is the monitoring and logging page. So here you can configure SNMP servers where you forward SNMP traffic. You can also disable it if you don't want to expose that SNMP information. You can enable log forwarding for syslog, which we strongly recommend. Logs are fairly important, and they have a lot of data in them. You can start to get some really interesting business value analytics out of it. You can see which pages and people are using and how fast they respond and where your developers are working. It also, like I said, returns performance data, so you can get a sense of that as well. The other thing you can do is you can proactively monitor if something isn't right. If you notice that there's a lot of hits to a single page, sometimes, developers make mistakes. I've done this before myself, where I've written a script that has a while loop in it, and I'll just keep hitting the same page, and then all of a sudden, now you have one user hitting 10,000 page requests. And so as an administrator, having those logs forwarded to an external logging service such as Logstash allows you that insight to really understand where that traffic is coming from and be able to proactively kind of take care of it before it becomes a problem for all of your users. So important tip here, you should really forward your logs. And even if you don't use them right away, once you have that data set there, you can start to do really creative things with it over time. The next important thing is setting up alerts, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but you want to make sure that you have your alerts in place, and you can do that through any of those three options. You can use SNMP, collectd, and logging to be able to alert on different parts of the performance metrics of the instance. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit away from the very configuration-oriented stuff to best practices across the entire appliance. And so one of the first areas that people often ask about is high availability and disaster recovery. Having a highly available instance is incredibly important. A lot of people's developers can't work without it. And so we really recommend a very specific setup to be able to get the most out of your GitHub Enterprise install. So the key thing is that Enterprise currently supports a single primary instance and a single replica instance. And you want to be able to make sure that those two are connected with a high bandwidth, low latency link. So we don't typically recommend that you put your replica halfway around the world. Some people do ask that they're oh, well, we want one server on one continent and another server on a different continent. And we actually don't recommend that because of the reliability of those links and the bandwidth available. What instead we recommend is that you run both your primary and your replica instances within the same data center, but on different stacks. So separate power supplies, separate network routing, as separate as you can make it within the same data center, but at the same time providing a high high bandwidth, low latency link between the two to make sure that everything is kept in sync. And then another thing that I'll point out here is the backup utils is a project that we support, and it's our solution for doing disaster recovery, is that we allow you to take snapshots of your data and copy it off-site. And so for those customers that do want that cross-site guarantee, we recommend that you actually run the backup utils project on a host in another data center here, as illustrated by this orange box. And that allows you that same kind of guarantee of having your data safely copied to another geographic region, but it doesn't come with the same performance requirements. So kind of the next area that people kind of often ask about is like, well, so now I have a whole GitHub install. How do I use organizations? And so we've seen a lot of customers use them in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that we found most important is that a lot of people will just create a single organization to start and then start adding everything under that one organization. And that works up to a certain point, but it's probably not the best practice. Like, remember that essentially you have unlimited organizations. And they're really a tool for you to control how users are grouped. And it gives you another tool in your tool set to make sure that your policies match what you want them to be. So one of the things that we found it useful for is to separate out contractors. So like when we work with a partner, we actually create a separate organization at GitHub where we work with that other partner company, and the GitHub employees that are permitted to see access to that are added to that organization as well. But that way we can guarantee that they don't have access to any of our other repositories, whether they're public or private, in our other organizations. Another area that we've seen them useful for other customers is acquisitions. So a lot of the times the acquisition process is kind of long and slow. And so like kind of the first step is getting that other company into your same install, but then putting them in a separate organization. And then over time, that allows you a path to start to get them closer and closer to the point where they can be grouped in with the other parts of your organization. The really key thing here is that it's easiest if your employees only have to work within a single organization on a daily basis. So while you can create lots of different organizations, you don't want to create an access pattern where your developers have to be in 4 different organizations, because it becomes trickier to do cross mentions and to reference other teammates. And it's also not super clear who's in what. But I think if you separate out based on business units, it's not that difficult to kind of achieve that. Kind of another area that people often ask about is upgrades. So upgrades are important, and they happen more frequently now than they did in the past. And the reason that we really want to create that steady cadence is that we want to deliver you the latest and greatest features that are tested from .com and provide them to your users in a timely manner. So we really strongly recommend that you keep pace with the upgrades, because oftentimes developers will see something on github.com and then immediately ask administrators in the field, when is this coming for me? And so if you have a proactive upgrade plan in place, you can get those latest and greatest advancements out to your developers. So our recommendations here is that you actually have a separate copy of your kind of production infrastructure that you can run in kind of a staging manner, that you can take a snapshot of your production and stage that upgrade so that you can time it out and plan your maintenance windows and know exactly what to expect. So that's kind of our best practice recommendation there. On alerting, which we mentioned previously, one of the key things to plan ahead on is capacity planning. So getting a sense of how your users are using your disk usage. That's kind of the biggest thing that we see people consuming over time. CPU and memory are also important parts, but those are things that are going to change slower over time. The real growth in resource usage is around disk usage. The other thing that we see people alert around is 500 responses. So you can get that data from the access logs. And we also provide a monitoring dashboard now in the instances that shows you when there's spikes in those application errors. And we don't see that happen very often, but when we do, writing into our support team usually resolves the issue fairly quickly. So the final thing we'll talk about here before questions is logging. Like I said numerous times throughout presentation, logging is really important. There's a lot of great data in that appliance. Logstash is like a great open source logging framework that you can forward that to. It's available on GitHub, and it supports kind of general log processing, so you can ask questions that you're interested in, as well as set up alerts in a timely manner if it's something that you can find in those logs. Customers have done some pretty fascinating things with this, like watch web request times, and also see specific user actions and auditing for their purposes. But the sky's kind of the limit of what you want to be able to do. There's a lot of data in there, so just wanted to make sure that that was known and available. So now I guess I'd like to open it up to questions to hear what you guys are most interested in. And if you can like raise your hand and like a point and then repeat the question and then get an answer out back to you. In the front here. So the question was, how often do we recommend upgrades? Like I said, we're always producing the latest bug fixes, the latest security fixes. We try to put them out on like the major releases in like in a kind of a quarterly process. Like if you can see in the last year, they've been every 3 months. Patch releases we do more frequently. The patch releases are not as big of a change. Oftentimes it's just security updates or minor changes in the code. And so the patch releases, we really do recommend, if there's a security fix in there, to upgrade immediately. And oftentimes, the amount of change in there otherwise is very minimal. So it's a lower risk kind of upgrade. Whereas the feature upgrades are like longer and involve more change. And so we really recommend kind of staging it out and making sure it works in your environment first before rolling it out to all of your developers. Let me see if I can repeat the question, and then you can correct me. For CI integrations, how do we recommend integrating with those? Yeah, so we don't offer a CI solution as a hosted version, but we definitely have partners today. So like I know Travis was one of them who does. And the recommendations there is that it's really crucial. We integrate with a lot of different CI systems. Like I know Jenkins is another popular one. You want to make sure that your CI systems are set up to pull. Or not to pull, sorry, to look for the webhooks of like events. And most third-party integrators have some solution for GitHub that will receive those webhook endpoints and builds based off that. If you're pulling, it's introducing additional load on the server that just doesn't need to be there. And oftentimes, CI farms are like the biggest consumer of those resources. Way in the back. Yes, the Visual Studio plugin, as far as I know, has a configuration option to point the URL. So I think by default, it probably goes to github.com, but I believe you can configure it to your GitHub Enterprise URL, and it will work the same way that it does on github.com. The question was, when you have an LDAP authentication set up, how do you scope the users so that it's So I believe that there's a way to sync, and I'll have to check on this. I believe there's a way to check for a specific attribute that says like this user is suspended, and like it won't sync. I'd have to go back and look for that. Okay, we should follow up offline then to figure that out. In the back here on the left.
Do you have a strategy for integrating your offline repositories, like the repositories behind the firewall, and ones that might be living on the internet or in a private cloud? So being able to access both?
So let me think about it. So would this be like your public repositories be on github.com? So you have like an internal version and an external version. I mean, I think the best recommendation there is that you do need both. Like we run several open source projects, and like we know that there are changes you can make in the public eye, and there's changes you can make locally. I think the best recommendation is kind of on the client, that if it's a Git repository, you can set up a remote that pushes like to your origin, like inside of your firewall, and then you can add another remote called like public. And so you can make a very explicit choice to push code publicly. We don't have anything in the product today that allows you to link your GitHub Enterprise install to like a public repository and merge code that way.
Do you have a performance white paper about the HA replica, specifically like RTO, RPO?
We do not have a performance white paper around that. And it depends on how you've configured your instance in order to what RTO and what RPO you're kind of interested in providing.
Right. At least for version 2.5, the replica works like sequentially for multiple repos. Do you have a plan to make that concurrently?
Can you summarize it? I'm not sure that I understand the question.
The replica move or back up the repo sequentially now, right?
Got it. Now I understand. So the question is about the backup utils currently run sequentially. Do we have any plans to make them parallelized? I think that's something we would definitely be open to. I think we've tried it in the past, and we were concerned about the amount of load that it introduced on the server to do that, because it is like putting load on the server you're pulling from. But it's definitely something that I could see us adding in the future. So currently today it's not automated. That was a very intentional decision. What we do provide is that we want to make it very clear, like once you've decided, the hard part is deciding when to fail over, quote unquote. It's hard for us to determine as like an automated piece of software when something's failed. But what we do provide is a way that like, it's fairly easy to go into a replica. It's like, I think 2 or 3 button clicks in like less than a minute to configure the replica to act as a primary. But the actual DNS failover, like where you swing a record from your primary to your replica, is going to be up to your infrastructure. And the timing around that, again, is going to be your TTL on your DNS record. So today, none of that is automatic, because we think it's important that customers make that decision as to when to fail over. Otherwise, you get into situations where if we fail over too quickly and it didn't actually take for all of your users, now you have data that's up to date in both, and now you have a tougher problem of resolving which is the source of truth. So that's the reason for not having a totally automated HA setup. Up here in the front here.
Do you have any tools for migration from other SCMs like Git, Garrett, or Subversion?
We don't provide any tooling today to allow import from other code systems. We do have that migrator that allows you to move between installs. We have some open source tooling we can definitely point you at, and we also have a services team that does this on a pretty regular basis. So they've got some pretty good practices around that as well. Oh, great, yes, I forgot. Yeah, so we actually have the services team. They've generously offered to have a 30-minute kind of like check-in session with each customer who's interested. We have a limited number of spots, but you can definitely check in with them. They're in the back left corner over here. Okay, well, it looks like we're out of questions here. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up a little bit early. But I will be available in the back if anybody decides there's more questions. Thanks for coming today, and I hope it was useful to everyone here.